Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another deity spotlight. Today we are doing our first god. We're doing our first male masculine deity. We've been doing nothing but goddesses thus far. And today we are doing our first god. And that god we're going to be talking about is Anubis. My cats are currently hunting a fly, so if you hear a lot of crazy sounds, it's them sprinting around trying to catch a fly. And before we get started, remember that if you like these deity spotlights, if you like my content on my channel, become a member of my channel, hit that join button below this video or on my channel page to become a member of my channel. As a member of my channel, you get access to a lot of exclusive perks, like early access to videos. You get to see videos 24 hours before anyone else, access to exclusive emojis to use in the comments on my videos and during live streams, and most importantly, you get to decide what I make next. So if you really like these deity videos and you've been waiting for a specific deity to get made by me, then become a member of my channel and vote in the member-only polls to decide which deity I make a spotlight on next. So all that being said, let's get into the video. Anubis is the ancient Egyptian god of the dead, and we're going to get more into the specifics of what he is the god of in a bit. Anubis was originally in ancient Egypt associated with the death and burial of the pharaoh, and over time his role changed and evolved to be more associated with the death of all, and not just the death of the pharaoh. Anubis is a jackal-headed deity. You'll see him right here. This is him. That's my statue of him. So you'll usually see him with the body of a man and the head of a jackal. I told you, they're hunting a fly. So you'll usually see him with the body of a man and the head of a jackal, or you'll see him as a full jackal. You'll see here on my altar, he's depicted as a straight up jackal. He does not have a partially human body in this statuary. So sometimes he'll have a partially human form, but he'll always be at least part jackal. And the reason that Anubis takes the form of a jackal is because in ancient Egypt, in early times, people would be buried in shallow graves. And it being the desert, they would be very easy to dig up. So there would be wild dogs of the desert digging up these shallow graves in the sand and scavenging the bodies. So that is where Anubis's form comes from, those wild dogs of the desert digging up those shallow graves in early Egyptian times. And the name Anubis comes from the ancient Egyptian word meaning putrefy. His name is also linked to a word meaning the king's son. And his name having a connection to a word that means the king's son could also be a reference to Anubis's connection to Osiris. And we'll talk more about Osiris in a minute. But the original meaning of Anubis's name is a little bit unknown and unclear. Like a lot of these ancient Egyptian deities and ways of life and beliefs, historians and archaeologists, they kind of just have to do the most research that they can and hope that they can get an answer. But because these things are so ancient, a lot of the time we're unclear where they originate from. And with ancient languages, it can be hard to translate them to our modern day languages. During the Old Kingdom, which was from 2700 BC to 2200 BC, prayers to Anubis would be carved on the walls of tombs, of burial spaces. And in the pyramid texts, again, he is mentioned many times in connection to the death of the pharaoh. So now let's talk a little bit about the connection between Osiris and Anubis, and some other deities as well. Often it's difficult when I'm planning these videos to talk just about one ancient Egyptian deity. A lot of them are very intensely connected within the pantheon, and a lot of them share attributes and work together in a lot of aspects of life. So in talking about Anubis, we have to talk about Osiris. So before the rise of Osiris within ancient Egyptian culture, Anubis was the main funerary god. He was the main god that had to do with death. And eventually, as Osiris began to gain popularity in the culture of ancient Egypt, the following of Anubis and the following of Osiris became intertwined and they became assimilated into each other. Osiris is often said to be Anubis's father. Sometimes Anubis is also said to be Osiris's brother. Most of the time you'll see Anubis being seen as Osiris's son, but sometimes texts will say that Anubis is Osiris's brother. So as Osiris became more prominent in ancient Egyptian religion and culture, he replaced Anubis as the main deity having to deal with death. But Anubis remained very important within death and funerary work, the ritual of dying and the ritual of burial. So now that Osiris is the main god of the dead, Anubis is now, instead of just being considered the god of the dead, the god of the pharaoh's death, he is now considered the god of mummification and of burial and of embalming. But he is still often referred to as the god of the dead along with Osiris. And let's talk about this transition, how this happened, how Osiris became the main god of the dead, and how Anubis became more so the god of mummification and embalming. So in Egyptian mythology, the stories of Egyptian religion, there is a story that tells of a time when Set, the Egyptian god of chaos, if you want to compare it to a more modern reference that most people will understand, you can compare Set to kind of a chaotic devil. So Set represents that chaoticness, that evilness. There is a story within ancient Egyptian mythology where Set tricks Osiris into getting in a box that Set has designed to trap him in. So Osiris gets in this box, Set locks him in, and basically Set kills him and dismembers his body and places the body all throughout different areas of Egypt. Isis, Osiris's wife, searches all over for these pieces of Osiris, and she finds every single piece except for his phallus, which she makes him a new one, and she gives these pieces to Anubis. Anubis then performs the first ever mummification. He places all of these pieces together and he puts Osiris back together. He wraps him like a mummy back together, and Osiris becomes the first ever mummy. This solidifies Osiris's place as the god of the dead and shifts Anubis's role to being more so the god of mummification and embalming. You may have also heard, if you're interested in ancient Egypt, of the weighing of the heart ceremony. This is something that the ancient Egyptians believed occurred after a person has died. When you are moving into the other world, into the afterlife, you would go through this ceremony where Anubis would weigh your heart on a scale against the feather of Ma'at. So this feather represented the goddess Ma'at, and if you want to know more about that, we'll talk about that in a future video. But Ma'at was the goddess of truth, justice, wisdom. So this is the ceremony where it's known, how did you do during your life? Is your heart heavy or is your heart light? Will your heart weigh down against this feather of truth and justice and wisdom? So this was a ceremony that Anubis would perform when someone died and was moving into the afterlife. And again, talking about the connection between Anubis and other deities of ancient Egypt, this would occur in the presence of Thoth. He is a god of the moon and a god of reckoning and wisdom and learning. So similar to Ma'at, his presence is needed in this ceremony to make sure that the truth is known. And he is charged during this ceremony, while Anubis performs it, he is charged with writing down what is found. So he records what occurs during this ceremony, if the heart was heavy or if the heart was light. In the coffin texts of ancient Egypt, Anubis is said to be the son of Hesat, who is a cow goddess, and the son of Bastet, who we've already made a video on, and she is right here. But Bastet is a cat goddess. Other stories say that Anubis is actually the son of Set, that deity that we talked about before that represents chaos, the deity who tricked Osiris and killed him. He's also sometimes said to be the son of Re and Nephthys. Plutarch, the Greek philosopher, recorded that Anubis is the son of Gretel. Gretel just climbed my whole window to get a fly. Did you get him? Oh my god, she murdered him. Way to go, girl. Plutarch, the Greek philosopher, records that Anubis is the son of Osiris and Nephthys, and that later on Isis, Osiris's wife, adopted Anubis as her own. Let's talk about some of the ways that you may see Anubis referred to. He has lots of different names. The first name that Anubis has is Foremost of the Westerners. Most cemeteries were on the western side of the Nile, the western bank of the Nile, and this symbolized the setting sun, the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. So Egyptians would refer to the dead as Westerners, and therefore Anubis is the leader of the dead, so he is referred to as Foremost of the Westerners. He's also sometimes referred to as Lord of the Sacred Land or Pure Land. You may also see Anubis referred to as he who is upon his mountain, or just who is upon his mountain. And this is based off of the image of this jackal-headed deity sitting atop these desert mountains and watching over Egypt, and watching over the burials of the dead from these desert cliffs. Anubis is also referred to as the ruler of the bows, and this refers to the 9 bows of ancient Egypt. And in the pyramid text, it says, the jackal, the governor of the bows, Anubis. And this was essentially a representation of the enemies of ancient Egypt, the enemies that they had conquered. So you'll see images of 9 captives bound, and these are the 9 bows. So this name of Anubis represents that Anubis has this control, this protection of Egypt. He will look out for enemies of Egypt, anyone who would look to harm the burials and the dead of Egypt, or Egypt just in general. Anubis can be a very protective deity. He is also known as he who is in the place of embalming, master of the Wabet. And the Wabet is where mummification and purification before burial would occur. Another name for Anubis is Foremost the Divine Booth. And this again represents his connection to the embalming booth and that ritual space where purification and embalming is performed. This name even represents his connection to the burial chamber as well as the sarcophagus itself. Now, talking a little bit about the time in history when Greco-Roman influence begins to come into play with ancient Egyptian history. During the Greco-Roman period, Anubis's role shifts a little bit. Anubis becomes more of a cosmic deity of earth and sky during this time, and he is more related during this time to being a bringer of light and wisdom. And in Anubis's original mortuary funerary role, he is very strongly associated with Hecate and with Hermes. Hermes is who in Greek myth is said to deliver souls to the river Styx. So Hermes transports the dead to the afterlife. Talking a little bit more about the appearance of Anubis. Anubis will always be seen with a black head. He is always viewed as a black jackal. This represents not only the fly attack, this represents not only the dark, rich black soil of the Nile, but also the color of a decaying and rotting corpse. Anubis is also often seen wearing a collar or a ceremonial tie around his neck. When Anubis is seen in full animal form as a full jackal with no human body parts, he is always depicted as either sitting or lying down. You will never see Anubis depicted as a full jackal standing up on all 4 legs. You'll either see Anubis depicted as a half human, half jackal standing up, or a jackal that is sitting or lying down. And Anubis's ears are always straight up erect. Another piece of ancient Egyptian mythology is that Anubis was said to be charged with protecting Isis while she gave birth to Horus. So again, Anubis can be a very protecting deity. And Anubis was the main deity of what the Greeks called the City of Dogs, Sinopolis. But Anubis's following was throughout Egypt, as he had such an intense role within the dying process and the afterlife process. And there is a chapel of Anubis in the temple of Hatshepsut. And just a quick little side note, I had to include that because I am like a massive Hatshepsut fan. I am just like obsessed with her. When I was originally doing all my research on Anubis way back when I started working with Anubis, learning that in Hatshepsut's own temple there was this chapel to Anubis really made me happy because I love Anubis and I love Hatshepsut. Priests would often wear jackal masks to channel Anubis and to honor Anubis during those rituals and during that ceremony of mummification and embalming, and amulets of Anubis were also very common among ancient Egyptians. So now that we know all about Anubis, let's talk a little bit about working with Anubis and the correspondences of Anubis. So obviously, anything having to do with death is very strongly associated with Anubis. So grief, transformation, regeneration, moving from one thing into another thing, transitioning, the endings of things. If you're ending a chapter in your life, that's a death. So it doesn't just have to be a literal interpretation of death where someone has actually died. It can be a more spiritual concept of death. And of course, anything having to do with the burial rites, funerary rites, preparing of the body after death, has a very strong connection to Anubis. So of course, any death doula work is a great way to honor Anubis and work with Anubis. I'm currently becoming a Thana doula, a death doula, and that is partially because it's something that I feel called to do through my work with Anubis. So again, like I said, grief is a great thing to work on with Anubis. If you have someone in your life that has died, then Anubis can help you to deal with that grief. As we said before, if you're trying to work with Anubis, the color black is very beneficial, again, to represent the dying body. Protection work is great to do with Anubis. Like we said, he's very protective. So if you need a bit of protection, Anubis can do that for you. And protection for if you have someone who died, you can do a protection with Anubis to help that person who died move through into the afterlife peacefully and easily. Anubis, again, because of that weighing of the heart ceremony, is very strongly connected to truth and justice, so you can also do spells having to do with that with Anubis. And also, any kind of astral travel between realms, can really be benefited with Anubis's help. Anubis is, again, he is aiding people to move from their physical body through mummification, through embalming, through the ritual funerary rites, and into that weighing of the heart ceremony, and finally into the afterlife. So he can very much so help you to travel through realms and move through those liminal spaces. So some offerings that you can give Anubis and some ways that you can work with him are, first, like we already said, grief. You can give him grief as offering. People very often, I feel like I've talked about this several times on my channel, but people often think of offering as something physical that you have to give. But you can give non-physical offerings that are just as beneficial, if not more, than a physical offering. And there's no messy cleanup. So you can give your grief to Anubis as offering. You can also give, and this is something I've done on my altar right there, you can give dried flowers or dead flowers to Anubis. You can also do things like volunteer on behalf of Anubis. You can volunteer at a hospice, volunteer at a hospital, cheering up the sick. You can volunteer at a dog rescue. Since Anubis is a dog, he's a jackal. So any kind of work that you can do to benefit dogs is a great way to honor and give offering to Anubis. You can also volunteer in cemeteries. Find out if there are any local cemeteries near you that take volunteers. Sometimes in cemeteries you can sign up to do lawn work, yard work, gardening, things like that, trimming grass and keeping it beautiful. Even cleaning tombstones, you can sign up to volunteer to help clean those older gravestones. Or even sometimes I've seen cemeteries say, we're going to have a trash pickup day. Come to the cemetery and help us pick up all the trash that's throughout this sacred burial space. So anything like that where you can honor the cemetery and protect those who have died and are resting in that place, Anubis will greatly appreciate that. I would like to say, though, do not just go to a cemetery and start doing stuff. You might think you're helping, but you need to get in touch with whoever it is that runs that cemetery and owns that cemetery, not only out of respect to make sure that what you're doing is okay with them, but also out of respect for the dead. They are resting, so you don't want to disturb them. And a lot of the time, there are certain protocols that a cemetery has, and you don't want to have that awkward situation where you're in a cemetery doing stuff that you don't have permission to do, and somebody from the cemetery comes up to you and is like, hey, what are you doing? So always get in touch with the cemetery first before you do anything like cleaning a tombstone, or mowing grass or tending flowers or anything like that. Get permission to do what you're doing in the cemetery before you do it. Another thing you can do in cemeteries that you don't need permission for is leave flowers on graves. You don't have to know the person. You can just leave some flowers on their grave. That is a great way to honor Anubis. He loves things like that, where you're protecting and honoring those who have passed, even those you don't know. You can also give incense as offering to Anubis. The main incenses that I think are really great to give Anubis are frankincense, myrrh, Egyptian musk, also sandalwood or cedarwood. Also, if you are someone who eats meat, is okay working with meat, you can give meat to Anubis, remembering that origin story of Anubis from those wild dogs of ancient Egypt that would scavenge those shallow graves in the sand. So you can give him meat as offering to honor that origin story of eating a corpse. And also a great offering to give to any ancient Egyptian deity is beer and bread. Another great way to honor Anubis is spend time in the darkness, in the nighttime. That's the time of death within our day. It's when the sun has set in the west, the sun has died for the day, and the day has ended, and we are in that liminal space where we're going to be reborn in the morning. So that space is very much so dominated by Anubis. So spending time in that darkness, in that nighttime space, is a great way to spend time with Anubis. And again, talking about dogs, if you have a pet dog, you can use this to aid in your Anubis practice. I do this a lot. And again, talking about Anubis's connection to Hecate, if you work with Hecate also, you can kind of kill two birds with one stone by doing things with your dog as offering for both Anubis and for Hecate, as Hecate is also associated with dogs. So you can give offering to Anubis by spending time with your dog, taking them on a long walk, taking them on a hike, especially, going on a sunset hike, going on a sunset walk when the sun is dying in the west and Anubis is coming into that nighttime, that time of his power. You can also train your dog, play with your dog as offering to Anubis, and just spend time with your dog, cuddle your dog. So that is all about Anubis. I hope that this video was helpful and that you learned everything that you need to know about working with Anubis. If you haven't started working with Anubis yet, I wish you so much luck on your journey with him. I've been working with Anubis now for, I guess 4 or 5 years I've been working with Anubis. He was the first god that ever approached me. I had only ever been approached by goddesses, and he was the first masculine energy to approach me, but he is the main patron god that I work with. But I hope that you enjoy working with Anubis as much as I have. Again, if you're someone who has experienced death in any sort of way, Anubis can be so helpful to work with. But even aside from that, Anubis is a very protecting spirit, and he will bring that to you no matter where you come from or what you've experienced, whether you've had an experience with death or not. Anubis can be so beneficial to work with. If you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, don't forget to give it a like so I know you're enjoying these deity spotlights. Feel free to comment down below what deity you most want me to make a video about. And remember, if you really like these deity spotlights and there's a certain god or goddess that you're waiting for me to make a video about, become a member of my channel and you'll get to have a little bit more say in what I do. I also just reached 3,000 subscribers, so thank you so much for helping me reach that milestone. I'm so excited to have you all here and a part of our little witchy community. So that is all I have to share with you guys today. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and become a member. Remember also that you can follow me on Instagram to see what I'm up to day to day, see what I'm doing in my witchy practice day to day. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you soon. Blessed be.